Who were we 2 million years ago? Were we fragile wanderers clinging to survival in a dangerous world? Or were we already the clever and ambitious species we see in the mirror today? So 2 million years ago, the Earth was alive with humans. But not just one kind. Across mountains, forests and open plains, different species walked the land, each carving out their place in a world of predators, harsh climates and limited resources. Some would vanish into extinction, others would rise to dominate the planet. All of them, though, left behind so many silent clues such as beads, ochre markings, ivory carvings and the bones of their dead, as traces that whisper their stories across the ages. This was not just another chapter in human history. It was the turning point, a period when the world's human stage grew more crowded, more competitive, and infinitely more creative. But who exactly were these humans? And how did they manage to thrive in such a dangerous, unforgiving world? That's where our story begins. Whenever we picture the world 2 million years ago, it's tempting to imagine one type of human, our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens. But that's not the reality. The Earth wasn't just home to us, it was a shared stage where multiple species of humans coexisted, competed, and sometimes even interbred. In Africa, Homo sapiens had already emerged as the dominant species. They were toolmakers, hunters, and artists, producing ochre engravings, beads, and bone tools that hinted at a mind very much like our own. Africa was their stronghold. These people were already beginning to journey outward, expanding into the Middle East, Asia, and eventually beyond. Meanwhile, in Europe and parts of Western Asia, another species survived, the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were not the brutish caricatures once imagined. They made sophisticated stone tools, hunted large game, and even created art and burial practices of their own. For over 200,000 years, they had endured Europe's ice ages, but their dominance would soon be challenged by the newcomers from Africa. Further east, in the icy caves of Siberia, another branch of humanity left faint but extraordinary traces, the Denisovans. Neither fully Neanderthal nor fully modern human, they were a mysterious people identified only in the last few decades. From a single cave in the Altai Mountains, fragments of bone and teeth revealed their existence, along with astonishing artifacts such as bracelets carved from chlorite, ivory tiaras, and the world's oldest sewing needle. Their genes live on today in populations from Asia to Oceania, proof that they too mingled with our ancestors. Even beyond Asia, humanity had already stretched its reach, so the Earth thousands of years ago was a tapestry of humanity, each with their own adaptations, their own strengths, their own ways of surviving, and together they set the stage for the next great transformation. So if we want to understand what it really meant to be human 2 million years ago, we must return to Africa, the place where our species first emerged and where the earliest sparks of modern behaviour were ignited. Here, in caves scattered along coasts and river valleys, our ancestors left behind not just bones and tools, but ideas, evidence that they were beginning to see the world in symbolic, abstract ways. Take Blombos Cave, tucked into the cliffs east of Cape Town. Excavations here uncovered engraved ochre pieces marked with cross-hatched designs. Simple, yes, but profound. These lines represent some of the earliest known art, proof that humans were already thinking symbolically. But Blombos held more, a 100,000-year-old paint workshop with abalone shells filled with ochre-rich mixtures of bone and charcoal. For them, this was chemistry, storage, and planning. The cave also yielded shell beads, more than 60 in total, showing that people were decorating themselves, perhaps signalling identity, status, or belonging. Also further along the southern coast lies the Pinnacle Point complex, a site that has rewritten human history. Here, evidence shows early people systematically harvesting shellfish 164,000 years ago, timing their foraging with tidal and lunar cycles. They heat-treated stone to improve toolmaking, a form of pyrotechnology. They even crafted microlithic blades that may represent the world's first projectile weapons. More than 50,000 artifacts were unearthed in a single season of digging, testimony to just how heavily these caves were used. Then there is Sibedu Cave, a treasure of technological firsts. From its layers emerged the world's oldest bone arrows, the earliest bone needles, and the first known use of compound adhesives for hafting tools. People here built bedding from sedges as early as 77,000 years ago, making Sibidu the site of humanity's oldest mattress. And scattered among the tools were shell beads carried from the sea, 15 kilometers away, evidence of symbolic ornaments and long-distance transport. The Claisies River caves add yet another dimension. With engraved ochre pebbles and fossil remains of anatomically modern humans, this site confirms that both art and modern anatomy were firmly established in Africa long before Europe's cultural explosion. These caves also preserve some of the earliest systematic use of marine resources, showing a people who knew how to harness the sea for survival. Africa was not just the birthplace of our species, it was the birthplace of human imagination. They painted, they adorned, they planned, they innovated, but humans did not remain in Africa forever. Armed with these new behaviors, they began to step out into new lands, encountering challenges, rivals, and opportunities. Now, the lands of the Levant, the rugged hills and coastal plains of what is now Israel, Lebanon, and surrounding regions served as a gateway between Africa and Eurasia. Here, Homo sapiens not only spread into new environments, but also encountered other human species already thriving in these territories. One of the most significant sites is Kafze Cave, near modern-day Nazareth. Archaeologists uncovered burials of anatomically modern humans dating between 120,000 and 90,000 years ago, long before the big migration wave at 50,000 years ago, but crucial for showing how early humans began experimenting with symbolic behavior. Red ochre was placed near graves, perhaps as a form of ritual. Shell beads, carefully painted with pigment, represent some of the earliest jewelry. Even cordage, strings used to thread ornaments, appears here, offering evidence of some of humanity's first fashion accessories. Not far away, on Mount Carmel, sits Skull Cave, which revealed something much more astonishing: the remains of individuals with both Homo sapiens and Neanderthal features. One 140,000-year-old child's skull bears evidence of hybrid ancestry, the earliest known mixed human individual. Here we see proof that long before Homo sapiens swept across the globe, they were already intermingling with their evolutionary cousins. Burial practices at Skull also suggest deliberate interment and organized grave sites, meaning that symbolic and spiritual ideas about death had already taken root. So these Middle Eastern sites highlight two critical aspects of humanity at 50,000 years ago. First, they show how early humans carried their African innovations, art, adornment, ritual into new lands. Second, they reveal that interbreeding between species was not a rare event, but a fundamental part of our shared history. Today, every non-African person carries 1 to 3% Neanderthal DNA. Once Homo sapiens adapted to its diverse environments, Mediterranean woodlands, arid deserts, fertile valleys, they began to push further. Before, Europe was a land of ice and shadow. Much of the continent lay under glaciers, and the rest was swept by frigid winds. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals had been the masters of this realm. They had weathered Europe's brutal climate in ways Homo sapiens had yet to experience. But that dominance was about to be challenged. When modern humans began entering Europe, likely around 45,000 years ago, they carried with them a toolkit of cultural and cognitive advantages: projectile weapons, symbolic art, and an unmatched ability to form large cooperative networks. These abilities collided with the Neanderthals' long-standing traditions, producing one of the most dramatic chapters in human history. The archaeological record captures this collision vividly. The Aurignacian culture, Europe's first widespread modern human tradition, stretched across the continent between 43,000 and 26,000 years ago. At Breitenbach in Germany, archaeologists uncovered vast settlements spread over nearly 10,000 square meters. Here, stone tools made from flint sourced hundreds of kilometers away show evidence of long-distance resource networks. Worked bone tools and ivory ornaments, including perforated fox teeth and carved rib fragments, highlight a world where symbolic display and craftsmanship mattered deeply. At Abri-Pataude in France, layers of occupation spanning 47,000 to 17,000 years ago paint an even more intricate picture. Burials, including that of a young woman interred with a newborn child, show both ritual and tragedy. Decorated artifacts, engraved antler, and goddess relief sculptures carved from limestone mark the rise of figurative art in Europe. Yet Neanderthals were not passive spectators. Sites like Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar show Neanderthal ingenuity at the very edge of their survival. Maastrichtian tools litter the cave floor: spear points, knives, scrapers. On the cave walls, archaeologists discovered engraved crosshatch patterns dating back 39,000 years. So was this Neanderthal art? If so, it proves that symbolic thought was not the sole domain of Homo sapiens. Gorham's also preserves evidence of bird hunting, marine resource exploitation, and even twisted bark fibres, early cordage technology once thought unique to our species. Still, the outcome of this encounter was inevitable. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals had vanished from most of Europe. Whether driven by climate shifts, competition, disease, or interbreeding, their disappearance marked the end of one human lineage and the triumph of another. Yet, they never truly disappeared. Neanderthal DNA still flows through modern veins. That's how Europe had become both a graveyard and a birthplace. The graveyard of Neanderthals and the birthplace of new human cultures that would dominate the continent for millennia. If Europe was Neanderthals' last stand, Asia was the stage for another, that of the Denisovans. Unlike their European cousins, Denisovans left behind almost no skeletal record. Instead, their legacy is written in fragments: a tooth, a finger bone, and most powerfully, in the DNA they left behind. Yet from these fragments, a vast world emerges. The heart of this mystery lies in Denisova Cave, nestled in Siberia's Altai Mountains. This unassuming cave, occupied for more than 250,000 years, has yielded artifacts of breathtaking sophistication. Archaeologists uncovered a 50,000-year-old ivory tiara, shaped with whittling, bending, grinding, and drilling, a level of craftsmanship once thought exclusive to Homo sapiens. They also found the world's oldest needle, 50,000 years old, made from bird bone, complete with an eye for threading fibre. Such finds suggest the Denisovans were not only capable toolmakers, but innovators in their own right. Jewellery fragments tell an even deeper story. A polished chlorite bracelet discovered here shows mastery of drilling techniques so advanced that some researchers argue it would challenge modern equipment. Tooth pendants and bone points dating 43,000 to 49,000 years ago demonstrate symbolic expression, suggesting Denisovans engaged in cultural practices similar to those of early Homo sapiens. But the true lives of Denisovans lies not in artifacts but in genetics. DNA from their remains has revealed they interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans. Today, their genetic signatures live on, particularly in populations of Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia, where up to 5% of DNA can be traced back to them. In fact, traits like high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan peoples are directly linked to Denisovan genes, showing how their DNA continues to shape human survival. But Denisovans were not confined to Siberia. Evidence suggests they roamed as far as the Tibetan Plateau and possibly Southeast Asia. Discoveries at Tam Po Ling Cave in Laos, where fossils dated to between 68,000 and 86,000 years ago were found, hint at modern humans' early movement into Asia, territories that would have overlapped with Denisovan populations. To reach Australia, early humans had to do something no species before them had ever attempted: cross open seas. This was not a casual stroll along a land bridge or a slow drift through connected valleys. This was deliberate, organised migration across treacherous waters, requiring planning, cooperation, and technology far beyond what one might expect from Stone Age people. Archaeological evidence tells us that humans arrived in Sahul, the supercontinent that once joined New Guinea, Australia, and Tasmania, by around 50,000 years ago, perhaps even earlier. To get there, they had to leave the Asian mainland, island hop through what is now Indonesia, and ultimately sail across stretches of ocean with no land in sight. This required boats, coordinated groups, and the courage to launch into the unknown. Once they landed, these humans transformed the land. Archaeological sites like Lake Mungo in New South Wales preserve traces of their lives: stone tools, fireplaces, and most strikingly, the remains of some of the earliest known ritual burials in human history. At Lake Mungo, scientists discovered a 40,000-year-old skeleton covered in red ochre pigment, marking one of the oldest known examples of symbolic burial practice. Australia's first people also left their mark on the land in dramatic ways. Within just a few thousand years of their arrival, much of the continent's megafauna, Giant kangaroos, enormous wombats called diprotodons, and towering flightless birds like Genyornis vanished. Debate continues as to whether climate shifts or human hunting drove these extinctions, but the arrival of humans coincided with the disappearance of animals that had dominated Australia for millennia. Even more remarkable is the continuity of culture. The descendants of those first ocean crossers are the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, whose oral traditions, rock art, and sacred sites preserve knowledge passed down over tens of thousands of years. Some of their Dreamtime stories describe landscapes that were later submerged by rising seas, hinting at memories stretching back more than 10,000 years. But as humans reach the farthest corners of the Earth, what happened to the other human species that once shared the planet? To answer that, we need to step into the shadowy world of the last survivors of human diversity. So, 50,000 years ago, the Earth was not a world of one humanity. It was a crowded stage of many. Neanderthals in Europe hunted mammoth and bison, Denisovans in Asia carved jewelry and shaped tools in shadowed caves, and small-bodied humans like the Homo floresiensis of Indonesia kept their quiet existence on islands. Meanwhile, our own species, Homo sapiens, was pushing outward, daring to cross oceans, painting cave walls with visions of life and spirit, and adapting to every environment from the Arctic tundra to the Australian desert. This was the last great moment of human diversity. Never again would the planet hold so many humankinds, living side by side. Within just a few thousand years, one by one, they would vanish. Neanderthals fading in Europe, Denisovans retreating into genetics, the island species extinguished, leaving Homo sapiens alone to carry the world. When we look back at that world, what we see is not just them, but us, because they are part of us. We are the last chapter of their story, and in many ways the beginning of something they set in motion long ago. The story of a species that dreamed beyond survival and dared to become human.